Long before history began, people told stories to explain the world. Why the sun rose, why storms raged, why love and war seemed to live in every human heart. From these stories grew a vast web of myths, filled with power, jealousy, courage, and fate. It was a world where the sky could think, the sea could feel, and the mountains themselves had tempers. Every river, every spark of fire, every gust of wind had meaning. And behind it all was the timeless struggle between chaos and order, pride and humility, mortals and the divine. If you like drifting off to the sound of forgotten worlds and ancient tales, a like or subscribe would be amazing. And tell me where you're listening from. It's always surreal seeing people from all corners of the world sharing the same mythic night. All right, tonight we're unraveling the entire story of Greek mythology, not through names and titles, but through the emotions, the lessons, and the echoes they left behind. So, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's journey back to the dawn of imagination itself.
At the very beginning, before there was anything at all, before there were heroes, cities, or even the stars that watch silently overhead, there was only chaos. Not the noisy kind with shouting and spilled wine. No, this was capital C chaos. A vast empty potential. No sky, no sea, no light or dark, just the quiet before everything. And then slowly something stirred. From the void came Gaia, Earth herself, broad and eternal, steady beneath all that would one day walk upon her. Next came Tartarus, a shadowy depth beneath the world, more abyss than place. Then Eros appeared, not a fluttering cherub, but a raw force drawing things together, setting creation into motion. From this strange, silent symphony, more emerged. Darkness, Erebus, and night, Nyx, who gave rise to day, Himera and ether, light. But most importantly, Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the sky, who arched above her, a canopy of stars and cold air. Together, earth and sky would begin the first great family. And as with many families, things started out lovely and got complicated rather quickly. Gaia and Uranus had children, 12 of them. 6 daughters and 6 sons, the Titans. Among them were Oianis, who wrapped the world in a ring of water, and Hyperion, who carried the sun across the sky. There was Thais, who embodied divine law, and Minimosi, the spirit of memory. The Titans were powerful and strange, born of the earth and sky made to shape the world. Unfortunately, Uranus found them unsettling. Perhaps they were too large or too loud, or maybe he simply wasn't ready for fatherhood. In any case, he shoved them back inside Gaia. Yes, inside their mother, which is never a good sign in mythology or in obstetrics. Gaia, understandably distressed by having 12 children wrested into her, began to devise a plan. She forged a great sickle from stone and approached her buried sons in the dark. One by one she asked for help. One by one they remained silent except Cronus, the youngest Titan. Cronus had a sharp mind and a patient nature, dangerous traits in combination. He took the sickle from his mother and waited, and when Uranus descended again to lie across the earth, Cronus leapt from the shadows. In one terrible stroke he castrated his father and flung the remains into the sea. From the blood that fell to earth came strange creatures, the Arrhenius, the giants, and the Malaya. From the foam of the sea, where the flesh of Uranus drifted, arose something unexpected. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, fully grown and radiant. Apparently in Greek mythology, even acts of unspeakable violence can yield supermodels. With Uranus gone, Cronus took his place as Lord of the Cosmos. He freed his siblings and ruled over what would be called the Golden Age, a time when humans, newly formed, lived without sorrow, and the gods had not yet begun their meddling. But prophecy lingered. Uranus had used his last breath, or whatever equivalent sky possesses, to curse Cronus. He warned that one day Cronus too would be overthrown by his own child. Now, having personally demonstrated how this kind of thing works, Cronus decided he would avoid repeating history by doing something very traditional, eating his children. He married his sister Rhea, again not unusual in divine circles, and every time she gave birth he swallowed the baby whole. Hestia, Data, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Down they went, swallowed one by one, trapped inside the dark of their father's belly. Rhea was horrified, and after losing 5 children to this culinary paranoia, she came up with a plan. When her 6th child was born, she wrapped a rocking cloth and presented it to Cronus. Ever the efficient tyrant, he swallowed it without checking. The real baby, Zeus, was whisked away to the island of Crete, hidden in a cave and raised by nymphs and a divine goat named Amla. There, under the dripping stone ceiling of the cave, Zeus grew. He was fed, loved, and trained in secret. He listened to stories of the siblings he had never met, siblings still alive but imprisoned within their father. And as he grew taller and stronger, so too did his resolve. One day, Zeus left the cave. He disguised himself and entered the court of Cronus as a servant. There, with the help of his grandmother Goia, he slipped a potion into Cronus's wine, something bitter, ancient, and mildly volcanic. Cronus began to cough, then he gagged. Then, with a noise that would echo in the halls of Olympus for generations, he vomited up 5 fully grown gods and goddesses, and also, of course, a large stone. Reunited at last, the children of Cronus stood together. They were not meek, they had not withered. They were divine and very angry. War was inevitable. The Titanomachy, the war between the old gods and the new, lasted 10 years. Cronus rallied the Titans to his side and took up residence on Mount Ophis. Zeus and his siblings made their stronghold on Mount Olympus. Between them, the world cracked and groaned. At first, neither side could win. Titans were strong, ancient, and terrifying. But the Olympians were clever, and Zeus, ever the tactician, had an idea. He descended into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld where monsters slept, and time grew heavy. There he found the Hecatonaris, massive beings with 100 arms each, and the Cyclopes, who had been imprisoned long ago by Uranus for being a little too inventive. Zeus freed them. In gratitude, the Cyclopes gave gifts. A thunderbolt for Zeus, searing and absolute. A trident for Poseidon, which could shake the seas, and for Hades, a helm of darkness, making him invisible to both god and mortal. One could argue they were the ancient world's first tech startup. Armed with these divine tools, the tide turned. Zeus hurled bolts that split mountains. Poseidon flooded battlefields. Hades walked unseen through enemy camps, sowing fear with whispers. Slowly, the Titans fell. Cronus was defeated and bound in chains of unbreakable iron. The Titans who had sided with him were cast into Tartarus, locked behind gates guarded by the 100-handed giants. Only a few escaped punishment. Theis, goddess of law, who had remained neutral, and Prometheus, who had offered quiet aid to Zeus. Atlas, the general of the Titan forces, received a special sentence. For his defiance, he was condemned to hold up the sky on his shoulders. Not the earth, as commonly misunderstood, but the endless heavens themselves, a job without days off or proper lumbar support. With victory secured, the gods turned to the world. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon and Hades, cast lots to divide the realms. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. The earth meanwhile was left to be shared, not out of kindness, but because they couldn't decide who would clean it. And so Mount Olympus became the seat of the new gods. There they would rule. There they would fight, feast, and make poor decisions that would echo through mortal lives for centuries. The age of the Titans was over. The age of the Olympians had begun. And in the shadows of that beginning, other stories waited. Stories of men, monsters, and the strange, stubborn thing called fate. By the time the gods stood reunited, the world had already begun to hold its breath. Olympus and Ophrus loomed on opposite ends of the horizon like loaded spears, and between them the air turned restless. War wasn't declared with a speech. It was simply inevitable. Cronus, unseated and humiliated, had fled to Mount Ophrus, dragging with him what dignity he had left and a number of deeply unsettled titans. He rallied his old allies, Oyanis, Apatus, Crus, and others, ancient beings who had once shaped the very bones of the world. These were not creatures of palace intrigue. They were elemental forces, and they were angry. Meanwhile, at top Mount Olympus, Zeus gathered his siblings. They were few in number, just 6 really if one didn't count the stone Cronus had eaten. But they were determined. Hestia, calm and constant. Data, wise and watchful. Hera, proud and already sharpening her tongue for future family squabbles. Hades and Poseidon stood ready, though the former spoke little, and the latter never stopped pacing. And Zeus, the one who had freed them, stood taller than the rest. The world unfortunately was not yet ready for them. When the war began, it shook the roots of the earth. Lightning cracked across a sky that had no business being angry, and mountains cracked as if the bones of Gaia herself were being tested. For 10 long years the Olympians and the Titans battled. The sound of clashing forces was said to echo across time itself, and if you listened closely, you could hear the sigh of someone realizing this would take far longer than hoped. The Titans had strength and age, but the gods had youth and spite. And as history has shown, spite can go a very long way. Yet despite their energy and cleverness, the Olympians were losing. The Titans held fast on Ophis, their fortresses built from stone and arrogance. Cronus was no fool. He knew war as well as prophecy. Every attempt Zeus made to break their lines was met with brutal resistance. At night the stars seemed to flicker with fatigue. It was then that Gaia herself intervened. Though the earth had birthed both titans and gods, she'd grown weary of endless conflict. The ground was splitting. The rivers ran foul. Even mortals, those fragile little experiments, were beginning to notice that the seasons were a bit off. Gaia whispered to Zeus in his dreams. "If you want to win," she said, "you must go deeper." So Zeus did. He descended into Tartarus, a pit so deep even echoes were reluctant to visit. It was not a place of casual tourism. In its endless blackness, creatures older than fear itself were bound in silence. And there, at the bottom, he found them, the Hecatonaris. 3 brothers, each with 50 heads and 100 arms, bound in chains that screamed when touched. Uranus had imprisoned them long ago, disturbed by their chaotic nature and the fact that shaking hands required a great deal of coordination. Alongside them were the Cyclops, the one-eyed smiths of legend, unjustly locked away simply for being a little too handy with magma and steel. Zeus broke their bonds. The chains crumbled like wet parchment in his hands, and the freed giants rose. The very walls of Tartarus trembled as they stretched, arms unfurling, eyes blinking open for the first time in centuries. They did not speak. They simply nodded. The Cyclopes, grateful and slightly soot-stained, offered gifts to Zeus. They gave the thunderbolt not just a weapon, but a piece of the sky itself, bottled and waiting to be unleashed. To Poseidon, they gave a trident that could shake the sea down to its bones, and to Hades, they gave a helm of darkness, a crown of sorts woven from shadow that would let him move unseen even among the gods. One could say it was their way of saying thank you, though the wrapping paper left much to be desired. With these gifts, the Olympians prepared for a final assault. The battle that followed was not so much a fight as a rewriting of reality. Zeus hurled thunder that carved rivers into mountainsides. Poseidon cracked open the earth and summoned walls of water to crash against the Titan fortresses. Hades, invisible beneath his helm, slipped behind enemy lines like a whisper. No door was safe. No thought was private. Even time seemed to pause and take notes. Cronus fought fiercely, sickle in hand, teeth bared in the stormlight. He had ruled the cosmos and tasted fear. He would not go quietly, but power once wrested from the hands of the old rarely returns to them, and slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. Zeus struck him down, not with a flourish, not with a speech, just one blinding strike of a sky-forged fury, and the Titan King fell. With Cronus defeated, the rest of the Titans began to break. Some tried to flee, scattering like crows before a fire. Others dropped their weapons and knelt, hoping surrender might soften the sentence. Most were cast into Tartarus, chained behind walls of black stone, watched eternally by the Hecatenaris. The punishment was neither swift nor particularly poetic, but it was effective. A few were spared. Prometheus, who had whispered guidance to Zeus when no one else dared. Thais, who had stood aside and measured justice even as her kin roared for blood. These were allowed to walk free, if only because Zeus was pragmatic enough to keep useful minds close. Atlas, however, was singled out. For his leadership, for his refusal to bend, he was given a special punishment to stand at the edge of the world and hold up the sky itself. Not the earth, as many mistakenly believe the sky, an infinite ceiling with no end and no ceiling fan in sight. To this day he holds it still with poor posture and no thanks. With the war ended, the gods stood among the wreckage. They had won, but there were decisions to make. The world could not remain unclaimed. And so the three brothers drew lots. Zeus claimed the sky, the winds, the clouds, the rolling thunder, and the vault of stars. Poseidon took the sea, the depths, the storms, and all that swam or drowned within. And Hades quietly and without protest accepted the underworld, a place of shadows and silence where the souls of the dead would wander. He did not complain, nor did he smile. He simply nodded. Some roles choose their bearer. The earth, curiously, was left to all, or perhaps to none. The gods would walk it, so would mortals, but it belonged to neither. With dominion divided, the gods made their home at top Mount Olympus, a place high above mortal reach, where storms danced and the air was thick with ambrosia. From there they would rule. But peace did not settle immediately. Scars remained. Resentment lingered, and even in their triumph, the gods were still young. Divine, yes, but prone to jealousy, pride, and an occasional poor decision involving mortal lovers. Still, a new age had begun. The age of Titans was over. The age of Olympians had risen, and while the thrones were now filled, the story was only just beginning. With the Titans defeated and the cosmos divided, the dust of war began to settle across the battered face of world. Olympus stood untouched by the valence, or perhaps simply indifferent to it, rising high above the clouds, a peak of impossible beauty where mortal storms dared not tread. And it was here, amid marble halls and eternal sunrises, that the new gods began to build their rule. The Olympians were not many in number, but they were loud, bright, and impossible to ignore. They didn't ask for attention, they radiated it. And now, with the realms of sky, sea, and shadow nately divided among the three brothers, it was time for something far more complicated: governance. Zeus, now king of the gods, took up his throne atop Olympus with all the grace of someone who had just invented the concept of rulerships 5 minutes ago, and was fairly certain he was excellent at it. He was a god of thunder, yes, but also of law, order, hospitality, and curiously justice, although the latter would soon prove to be more of an optional suggestion. With his thunderbolt in hand and his beard growing increasingly dramatic, Zeus declared the new age begun. From now on, Olympus would be the centre of divine power, and he would sit at its centre. Zeus ruled the skies, the clouds, the wind, the rain, and the storms. Every roll of thunder was his voice, every flash of lightning his will. He was the judge, the enforcer, and occasionally the problem. He was known to be noble, but impulsive, wise, but easily distracted, and his distractions almost always involved mortal women, swans, golden showers, or some deeply questionable combination thereof. Poseidon, in contrast, was less dramatic, but far more volatile. As Lord of the Sea, he claimed dominion over every drop of water from the deepest trench to the highest wave. He built a palace of coral and pearl beneath the ocean, surrounded by dolphins and sea beasts, and declared it his own private court. Poseidon was a god of earthquakes as well, which was unfortunate for coastal cities, as he was famously touchy. A bad mood from Poseidon could level entire towns. Still, he was not unkind. He had a soft spot for horses, which he allegedly created, and for sailors, whom he alternated between saving and drowning, depending on whether they remembered to offer him wine. Hades, eldest of the three, ruled the underworld, a realm of endless mist and shadow, where the dead arrived not with fanfare but with quiet inevitability. His kingdom was not a place of fire and brimstone. It was solemn, vast, and cold. Rivers crossed it, the Styx, the Lethe, the Aeron, each with its own dreadful poetry. The souls of mortals wandered there, guided by Hermes and judged in silence. Hades did not reside on Olympus, preferring the company of shades to that of his siblings. He was not evil, nor cruel, merely absolute. Where Zeus thundered and Poseidon surged, Hades endured. His kingdom did not end, and so neither did his watch. And then there were the others. Here, Queen of the Cods took her place beside Zeus reluctantly, and with several raised eyebrows. She was the goddess of marriage and family, which some considered ironic given her husband's frequent adventures in shape-shifting seduction. Hera was proud, sharp, and deeply committed to her role. She did not forget insults, and she rarely forgave betrayals. Her domain included the sanctity of marriage, childbirth, and the defence of women. But she's best remembered for her jealous vengeance, often taken not on Zeus, but on the poor mortals he failed to resist. One might argue that she confused marital fidelity with pest control. Data, goddess of the harvest, tended to the earth. It was she who made crops grow and seasons turn, When she walked the fields, grain sprouted behind her feet. She was calm, maternal, and warm, but not to be crossed. The world would learn this lesson the hard way in time. Hestia, the gentlest of the Olympians, ruled over half, and home. She received the first portion of every sacrifice and kept the fire burning in every city. She avoided the intrigues of her more theatrical siblings and remained steady, the one constant in a family of shifting tempers and sudden storms. And then came Athena, born fully grown and armoured from Zeus's skull, a detail best left unexamined. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, war, and crafts. She preferred strategy to savagery and thought before she acted, which made her a rare creature indeed on Olympus. She carried the aegis, a shield bearing the head of Medusa, and advised kings, heroes, and anyone who could tolerate being corrected mid-sentence. She was one of 3 virgin goddesses sworn to no man, mortal or divine. Not that many would have dared try. Apollo and Artemis followed, twins, radiant and deadly in their own right. Apollo was the god of the sun, music, prophecy, and medicine. He played the lyre with divine perfection, and occasionally used it to taunt people into becoming animals. His oracle at Delhi would soon become the most famous voice of prophecy in the world, even if her delivery left much to be desired in the clarity department. Artemis, his twin, ruled the moon, the hunt, and the wild places of the world. She walked beneath the trees with her bow and her hounds, guarding animals and young girls alike. Like Athena, she rejected the company of men, and like Athena, reacted poorly when disturbed at bath time. Iris, the god of war, arrived with less fanfare but far more shouting. He represented the raw chaos of battle, blood, rage, and clanging armour. Where Athena was war's strategist, Iris was its tantrum. He was strong, loud, and frequently wounded in embarrassing ways. Even Jews found him irritating. So did everyone else. Then came Hestus, god of fire and the forge. Born lame and cast from Olympus by his own mother, Hephaestus learned to create beauty from pain. His hands forged the weapons of gods and heroes. He built automatons of gold and crafted palaces of impossible engineering. Despite his brilliance, he was married off to Aphrodite, which led to precisely the sort of drama one expects when a quiet engineer marries the goddess of desire. Aphrodite, born from sea foam and divine scandal, ruled over love, beauty, and mischief. She could bend hearts like reeds and use that power liberally. She was captivating, vain, and occasionally vindictive. Her affairs were legend, as were the reactions of those she scorned. Cupid, or was her frequent companion, firing arrows of affection at mortals who usually didn't appreciate the timing. Then there was Hermes, the messenger god, the trickster, the traveller. Hermes wore winged sandals and carried a caduceus. He was the god of boundaries, thieves, merchants, and speech. He could move between worlds with ease and talk his way out of nearly anything. He was clever, fast, and entirely too pleased with himself. And lastly, Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, madness, and theatre. He arrived late to Olympus, but with great enthusiasm. His festivals would soon sweep across Greece like wildfire, equal parts joy and delirium. Dionysus was both freeing and dangerous, the thin line between celebration and frenzy. Together, these 12 and a few rotating extras became the Olympians. They were gods, yes, but also a family. A dysfunctional, vengeful, hilarious, and deeply theatrical family. They shaped the weather, fate, love, and war. They raised empires and doomed heroes, and they quarrelled constantly. One might say the only thing more powerful than their divine abilities was their collective inability to mind their own business. But they were not distant. Unlike other gods who sat silently in unreachable heavens, the Olympians walked the earth. They took sides in battles, guided ships, whispered to poets, and occasionally turned people into shrubs. They were worshipped in temples, honoured with sacrifices, and cursed in private. Every city had its patron, every home its altar, and though they ruled from a mountain wrapped in cloud, they were in spirit very close. Olympus had risen, the gods had found their seats, and across the earth the stories had only just begun. After the dust of the Titanomachy had settled, and the last thunderbolt echoed off the mountain tops, Zeus and his siblings assumed their roles as rulers of the cosmos. The universe had been divided. Zeus took the heavens, Poseidon claimed the seas, and Hades was given dominion over the underworld. With the Titans banished to Tartarus and the Olympians seated on their thrones, a new age began. The sky crackled with divine energy. The sea stirred under Poseidon's command, and deep below the spirits of the dead began their long march through the misty halls of Hades. The earth, however, was eerily quiet. There were mountains, yes, vast and majestic, rivers and forests teeming with life, seasons turned in elegant cycles, birds sang and wild beasts prowled the land. But something essential was missing. There was no intelligence gazing up at the stars, no stories told by firelight, no fear or reverence directed toward the heavens. The gods had their kingdom but no audience. Prometheus, the Titan whose name meant for thought, saw this void and felt it more acutely than any other. Where others had been content with power or vengeance, Prometheus had always been drawn to creation. He had fought alongside the Olympians during the war, not out of loyalty, but out of belief in the future they might build. A future he realized as woefully incomplete without mortals to walk the earth. And so he descended from Olympus and wandered through the valleys and across the plains until he reached a quiet riverbank. There, kneeling in the mud, he gathered a handful of clay and began to shape it. Not out of arrogance or ambition, but with the careful precision of an artist and the quiet awe of a parent. He moulded limbs, curved a spine, added fingers to grasp, feet to roam, and eyes that could marvel at the sky. He formed mouths not just to eat, but to question, to sing, to tell stories that would outlive them. When the forms were ready, he breathed life into them, a divine breath, and not just air, but spark and soul, thought and fire. These were not animals, they were not gods, they were something entirely new. They were humans. At first they were clumsy. They stumbled through the forests, confused and curious. They lacked claws, fur or fangs. They feared the dark, the cold, the howl of wolves. But they learned quickly. They made tools of stone, mimicked the calls of birds, and formed crude shelters from branches and leaves. They were fragile, yes, but endlessly inventive. And to Prometheus, they were magnificent. Zeus, however, was less impressed. From his golden throne on Olympus, he looked down at these new creatures and scowled. "They look like us," he said, voice thick with suspicion. "They were inspired by us," Prometheus replied evenly. "They're weak. Look at them. They don't even know how to survive a frost. They can learn. They shouldn't be learning. They should be worshipping," Zeus muttered. Prometheus said nothing. Zeus frowned. "Don't give them too much. Let them remain grateful." Prometheus nodded outwardly, but in his heart he disagreed. He continued to watch his creation, and what he saw troubled him. The humans cowered in caves when night fell, trembling in the cold. They ate their food raw, risking sickness. Their lives were short, their progress slow. What they needed, Prometheus knew, was fire, but fire was forbidden. It was divine, reserved for Olympus alone. It burned in Hestia's hearth in Aestus' forge. No mortal was allowed to touch it. Zeus had declared it so, and his word was law. Prometheus stole it anyway. One night, while Olympus was shrouded in sleep and starlight, Prometheus crept to the hearth of Hestia. He plucked a single coal from the eternal flame and tucked it into a fennel stalk. An ordinary plant with a hollow stem perfect for concealment. He slipped away, descending from the heavens with his precious smouldering gift. When he gave it to humanity, the world changed. With fire they transformed the night. They warmed themselves, cooked food, and forged stronger tools. They began to gather around flames and tell stories, to pass on knowledge, to dream. Smoke rose from their hearths like prayers. Fire became a symbol of everything that made them different from beasts, everything that hinted at the divine within them. Zeus was furious. "You gave them fire," he roared, lightning crackling at his fingertips. "They needed it," Prometheus said. "They will challenge us. They will forget to fear. They will flourish." Zeus saw no wisdom in those words, only defiance. As punishment, he ordered Prometheus to be seized and chained to the highest and most desolate peak of the Caucasus Mountains. There the Titan was bound with unbreakable chains forged by Hystasis himself, and left to the elements. But even that was not enough. Each day an eagle, a monstrous divine bird, would descend and tear into Prometheus's side, devouring his liver. Each night the wound healed, and each morning the eagle returned. The cycle was endless, the pain eternal. And yet Prometheus endured. He did not beg. He did not repent. For in the far distance he could still see the smoke of fires rising from human villages. His suffering, he believed, was a fair price. But Zeus was not finished. Prometheus had given humanity a gift. Now Zeus would give them one too, a gift wrapped in beauty, charm, and danger. He called upon Hystas once more, and the gods fashioned a woman from clay. She was shaped with care and gifted by each Olympian. From Aphrodite she received beauty, from Hermes persuasion, from Athena skill, from Hea pride, but from Zeus she received something else entirely, curiosity. They named her Pandora, meaning all gifted. To her, Zeus gave a sealed jar. "Do not open it," he warned. "No matter what you hear, no matter what you feel, leave it closed." And then he sent her down to earth. Prometheus, from his distant prison, had no way to warn his brother Epimetheus, who welcomed Pandora without hesitation. She was clever, kind, and filled with questions. She admired the humans, asked about their ways, their stories, their tools, but the jar haunted her. It sat quietly in their home, sealed tight, and yet it pulsed with mystery. What lay inside? Why was it forbidden? What would happen if, and one day, her curiosity won? She opened it. From within the jar exploded a torrent of miseries, disease, envy, sorrow, madness, greed, war. All the suffering the world had never known before now poured into it. Pandora cried out and tried to close it, but the damage was done. She fell to her knees, trembling. But from the depths of the jar she heard something else, something soft and steady. Hope, the last thing in the jar, the only thing that had not escaped. She closed the lid gently, keeping hope inside. And though the world was now filled with pain, with loss, and with fear, it also had hope. Humanity, for all its grief, did not fall. They fought, they mourned, they loved, and they tried again. chained to the wind-blasted crags. Prometheus would sometimes close his eyes and remember the day he gave them fire. Not the theft, not the flight from Olympus, but the moment he watched their faces light up. He remembered how one child reached out to touch the flame and quickly pulled back, laughing, eyes wide with awe. He remembered the old woman who used it to cook food for the first time. The astonishment on her face when she realized the tubers didn't taste like soil anymore. That was the moment he knew he'd done the right thing. The humans, meanwhile, evolved quickly. Fire allowed them to settle, to cook, to forge tools from bronze and iron. They began to sing, not just out of fear or grief, but joy. They created rituals around fire, danced beside it, married before it, whispered secrets into its embers. Their societies grew, crude but determined, with fire at the heart of every village. And Pandora, she was not wicked. She had not opened the jar out of malice. She had wept, not just for the pain she had released, but for the betrayal she felt from the gods who had made her a weapon. From the silence of the heavens when she cried out, but hope had spoken to her too. Not in words, but in warmth, in stillness. It reminded her that even if she had been used, she was not beyond forgiveness. Zeus in time came to realize the humans would not be wiped away. They were tenacious. They prayed, they cursed, but they kept building, and their fires never went out. By the time Zeus had secured his place on the throne of Olympus, one might have hoped he'd settle into the routine of celestial leadership, passing judgment, throwing the occasional thunderbolt, maybe hosting a divine banquet or two. Instead, Olympus quickly became less a seat of power and more a swirling court of rumours, jealousies, and very loud arguments. At the centre of it all stood Zeus, king of the gods and serial destroyer of trust. For all his power and wisdom, Zeus had one consistent weakness: mortal women and nymphs and goddesses, and occasionally things that only looked vaguely like women. His tastes were eclectic, his disguises inventive, and his timing, by all divine accounts, terrible. But the one being who could never quite overlook these indiscretions was his wife, Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, and patron of eternal grudges. Their marriage was, in the politest terms, an ongoing diplomatic crisis. To understand Hera's fury, one must understand the scale of Zeus's extracurricular activity. He did not simply flirt. He transformed himself into golden rain, bulls, swans, and clouds, all to pursue love or lust, depending on your interpretation. Each affair left behind not only a trail of divine gossip, but a legacy of demigods, heroes, and mortal tragedy. Take Io, for instance, a priestess of Hera herself. Zeus approached her in secret, whispering sweet nothings with the confidence of a god who thought himself untouchable. But Hera's suspicions were never far behind. As Zeus saw his wife approaching, he panicked and turned Io into a beautiful white cow. A fine solution had Hera not immediately demanded the animal as a gift. Cornered, Zeus obliged. Io, now thoroughly boyne, was handed over to Hea, who promptly assigned Argus Panoptis, the 100 guardian, to keep watch. To free Io, Zeus enlisted Hermes, who lulled Argus to sleep with music before killing him and releasing the poor girl. Hea naturally retaliated by sending a gadfly to torment Io endlessly, stinging her into a frantic journey across the known world. Ios' footsteps carved place names into maps: the Ionian Sea, the Bosporus, and though she would eventually reach Egypt and be restored to her human form, her tale was never quite forgotten. Nor was Hea's wrath. Another of Zeus's better-known pursuits was Leto, a gentle Titaness who bore a quiet dignity, and very little interest in becoming the centre of a divine scandal. But when she became pregnant with Zeus's children, twins no less, Har flew into a fury. She decreed that no land under the sun should give Leto sanctuary. The desperate mother to be wandered from island to island, turned away by cities and shores alike. Finally she arrived at the floating island of Delos, a place not tethered to the earth, and thus exempt from her curse. There, after 9 agonizing days of labour, Leto gave birth to Artemis and then Apollo, 2 of the most influential gods of Olympus. Here had tried to delay their entry into the world. What she got instead were 2 children who would shape mythology forever. Apollo, the god of light, music and prophecy. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and guardian of the wild. Both remembered what their mother endured. And then there was Semele, a mortal woman from Thebes, who unlike Io or Leto did not flee Zeus's advances. She loved him, and for once Zeus loved her back. But this story too did not end well. Hera, in one of her more cunning moods, disguised herself as an old nurse and visited Semele, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. "If your lover is truly Zeus," she said sweetly, "should he not reveal himself to you in all his glory?" Semele, young and trusting, asked Zeus to do just that. Bound by an oath he could not break, Zeus revealed his divine form, and Semele was instantly incinerated by the sheer force of his presence. It was, to put it mildly, not the romantic climax she had imagined. Yet from the ashes came Dionysus. Zeus rescued the unborn child by sewing him into his own thigh until he was ready to be born. A detail rarely featured in lullabies. Dionysus, god of wine, madness and theatre, would grow into one of the most unpredictable deities in the Greek pantheon. His birth, both tragic and miraculous, was another strange testament to Zeus's chaotic domestic life. These weren't isolated incidents. Zeus's unions, consensual or otherwise, with mortals, nymphs and goddesses alike, produced a sprawling genealogy of heroes and demigods. Heracles, born of Alcaine, Perseus, son of Dar, Helen of Troy, supposedly hatched from an egg after Zeus seduced or assaulted her mother later in the form of a swan. The stories vary in tone but are united by their consequences. Human history and myth was shaped by divine passion, and Hera's furious fallout. Hera's vengeance was rarely directed at Zeus himself. He was king, and even she, powerful as she was, could not overrule his will. Instead, her fury fell upon the women he seduced and the children they bore. Sometimes this meant banishment, sometimes torment, sometimes the slow corrosion of fate. In Heracles' case, it meant a lifetime of madness and suffering designed to humble even the strongest son of Zeus. But Har was more than just a jealous wife. She was queen of Olympus, the protector of marriage, and a goddess who demanded respect. Her punishments, though harsh, were consistent. She embodied order in a pantheon of chaos, permanence in a world shaped by whim. And yet, for all their conflict, Zeus and Hera stayed together. Perhaps out of divine obligation, perhaps out of stubbornness, or perhaps because the heavens themselves needed a king and queen to mirror the mortal structures below. Their marriage, filled with betrayal and bickering, reflected not perfection, but permanence. A truth familiar to many who stayed in relationships well past the dramatic bits. In a strange way, these affairs, these tangled, scandalous unions, served a cosmic purpose. The world of men was populated not by the children of dirt alone, but by those who bore divine blood. These offspring became the bridge between gods and mortals. They fought wars, founded cities, slew monsters, and often lived just long enough to inspire a tragic song. And the gods watched them, proud and exasperated in equal measure. Zeus, for all his wandering desires, never stopped asserting control from Olympus. Hera, for all her grievances, never relinquished her crown. Their disputes became divine theatre, shaping weather, politics, and fate. One thunderbolt from Zeus might signal a divine tantrum. One withering glance from Hera could doom a kingdom, and mortals, those unlucky enough to fall into their drama, rarely escaped unscathed. So the gossip of Olympus continued. Mortals whispered about gods falling in love and being punished for it. Nymphs avoided cloud-shaped strangers. Kings built temples in Hera's name, hoping to avoid her eye. And the world spun on, tangled in the affections and fury of its heavenly rulers. For all the chaos Zeus caused, and for all the revenge Hera unleashed, there was one constant. Their stories lived on, told in temples and whispered around hearth-fires. They became the myths that explained not just thunder and childbirth, but betrayal, jealousy, and the strange persistence of love. And somewhere high on Olympus, or hidden in the clouds, Zeus likely smiled at another mortal girl, and her sharpened her stare. And for mortals, these stories weren't simply entertainment. They were cautionary tales, moral blueprints, and strangely comforting explanations for the unexplainable. Why did love so often lead to tragedy? Why were some people born into greatness while others were fated to suffer? The myths offered answers, albeit ones dressed in divine drama and poetic injustice. Sleep now. Let yourself sink deeper into that perfect relaxation. Your eyelids are heavy. So heavy it would take too much effort to open them now. Your limbs feel pleasantly weighted, impossible to move even if you wanted to, which you don't. You just want to drift all the way down into deep, restful sleep. That's it. Just let go completely. The day is done. The work is finished. Nothing more required of you now except to rest, to renew, to dream perhaps of different possibilities, different worlds. But for now, just sleep deep and peaceful, easy and calm. Sleep now. Sleep well. Drifting deeper with each breath down and down into perfect, complete rest.